Welcome to the Zencast. My name is Dale Pickles, Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Zencast, a podcast for special educational needs and disability. Each week on the podcast, we are talking about a different topic within the world of special educational needs and disability to improve our knowledge, to provide support to professionals working in schools, and to empower parents. And in a world where there is less guidance, less money, more demand and continual changes, teachers, Senkos, leaders, and in reality, all staff need a way to keep up that fits in with their lives, and the Zencast is that answer. And in this episode, we're discussing using a standardised approach to pass exams with my guest, Dr Susie Nyman. Susie is a regular on the podcast and is the curriculum manager at the Sixth Form College, Farnborough. And Susie simply loves multisensory teaching and spends lots of time trying to spread the word. And if you haven't seen Susie live in person, I'd highly recommend it. The Zencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. As well as our assessment products and our evidence and parental engagement platform, we also run online training sessions that we call Zencast sessions. If you go to the Zencast website, you'll see there is a range of over 100 training sessions. These sessions often feature our amazing podcast guests, but are more formal, with slides that you can also download. We run 9 live sessions each year, which you can join in and be part of that Q&A at the end of this session. And we also run 2 free send briefings each year so you can keep up to date with all the changes around the world of SEND. And if you can't make those sessions live, when you buy them or when you register for those free briefings, they are yours forever. You can find out more about our training sessions and our free send briefings by going to the Zencast website. Now, let's get on with the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing a standardised approach to passing exams that works for all students, not just those with SEND. My guest is Dr Susie Nyman, a regular on the podcast and the curriculum manager at the Sixth Form College in Farnborough. She is passionate about discovering how students learn and support them in ways that enable them to succeed. And a lot of this is multisensory. She's provided training to PGCE students at the Kingston University and a number of local schools and colleges, all on teaching strategies. She also delivered talks on multisensory techniques around the world. Welcome back to the podcast, Susie.
Thank you very much, Dale. Today we're going to talk about the standardised approach to passing exams. So this is based on some research we did last year when we had lots of our grades in our anatomy exam. Anatomy actually is really difficult to pass, and me and my friend actually formulated this approach to help our students to reduce the number of R grades, get more passes and move them up the scale so that overall they'll get higher grades and then get into better universities. So that approach to starting off is about really like going up a mountain. You start with a specification, the textbook. The textbook. That student might not be able to read the textbook, in which case you can get a copy downloaded on RNIB Bookshare. We've got a student at the moment who is visually impaired, so we can download that for her. The textbook they might like to have as an audio file. We might use Collibra or something like that. They then need to make their notes in a way that they understand, and notes that are relatable to things that they can remember and situations. To make mind maps and flashcards, those mind maps to have dual coding, not just words, but also images, ways of remembering those key words. The flashcards, they might put the information on the front and then questions on the back. The exam questions, to go through those. Form study groups. If you've got 4 students doing 5 minutes each, together they've done 20 minutes work and preparing finally for that exam.
Now, I just want to talk about it because you have a lovely image in your slide pack, which is going up that mountain. And I think in reality, you've got all those big specifications and all that going up there. But in reality, you don't just say, we're going to do notes now. That all has to be taught and prepared. And when we discussed on the Dyslexic Grade Riser, which is where this approach has come from and grown, is that realization that the base camp is when they arrive at your setting. It's the base camp isn't building up to the exams. That base camp is when they arrive with you and you're starting that course. That's the base camp.
Yes.
And I think a lot of time is people go through the year, there's things, making right, let's revise. And it's kind of, that's when the exam prep comes in. Whereas this process is saying the whole thing towards the exam starts at the very beginning.
It does.
You're going to teach them every bit. So you're going to teach them about what that specification means. You can make sure they can access that textbook. How do they make notes? Those mind maps, those flashcards. That is something you're helping them learn to do what works for them all the way through.
Yeah, and to put in exam questions every lesson, not just put in exam questions at the end. And as you teach a topic, then give them the exam questions so that they can see what's going to come up.
Yeah.
But on Monday, I spent 10 minutes and I said, okay, we've done blood. I want you to create a question on blood. Tick in the box, fill in the gaps, true and false. And the whole class wrote a completely different question. And I said, if you practice this, one of these might actually come up in the exam. And then when you open that paper, you're not going to be fazed by it.
No, definitely not. But it is a long-term thing. It's not something you do towards the end. This is your whole syllabus, the course content, all needs to take this all into account as part of it.
And in every lesson, I speak to them about observing and narrating. We have great big pictures on the wall that the students have painted of the heart, the kidney, and they can actually see those images. And when I'm talking, I'm pointing to them. And I said, you need to observe that. And then you need to narrate it. You need to visualize it. You need to verbalize it. Because you talking about it helps you to remember it. Talking and sharing that information with your peers, with your next door neighbor, really helps too. And a lot of the time I get them to talk back their answers to their friends. I might get them to sequence things in pairs so that they can see, whether they understand it or not. Every day, every minute, we use multisensory techniques. And I'm not saying that you have to do it in a multisensory way because that's the way to teach it. What I've noticed with my students on that, what I call exit ticket, as they go out, I say to them, how did you learn that today? What helped? Some of them will say, it's when we drew the diagram on the whiteboard, Susie. It's when you got the balloons out, Susie, and showed us a model. It's when you squeezed that balloon at the bottom and showed us that the ventricles were contracting. It could even be when you're taking the model apart and showing where that heart is located. All of them will understand it and learn it and take that little takeaway in a completely different way. And this week we were doing arteries and veins and I use hula hoops, another little hoops. And I said to one girl, which bit did you get? It was the hula hoop, Susie. And they can visualize it and understand it. Another one, I was talking about pressure. I was talking about hose pipes. And that girl got it. And she could visualize the pressure in the hose pipe and the pressure increasing if she was trying to squirt her brother at the bottom of the garden, because she's obviously done that before. Okay. So that's why I do multisensory techniques, because different students pick up different things in different ways and you try and relate it to them, their situations. So we might just look at, if you're looking at the brain, you're then stimulating the brain in so many different ways, forming connections to help that person remember. We've got onion teaching that core concepts, those core concepts, and I'll start off maybe with the heart. It's the size of the fist. They can see how big it is, get the model out, clap the key words to Michael Jackson's Beat It. I get my pointed stick and I conduct in the class. 3, 2, 1, go. And then vena cava, right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, and we actually dictate it and we chant it until they really understand it. We might then sequence it, we check one another. We play the weakest link. They love the weakest link. They really do love that game at the end. So you've got to do it in so many different ways until they understand it. When you're starting that topic and you get that textbook, I spent hours in the bookshops in Oxford when I lived in Oxfordshire with my son, choosing the right book that he could access. Some of the books are good with the words and pictures. Some of them are all text. Some of them are blocked out, especially the CGP books with coloured backgrounds and things like that. The students need to sort of block off the bit so that they can read it easily. And we have 2 textbooks. One of them is full of text and the other one is full of bullet points. And they prefer the bullet pointed one. They find it easier to understand with easier diagrams to follow.
There's a thing, it's I think we use the textbooks full of words, but it's what is the key bit? And I know most textbooks, here's the whole information, and then at the end of this chapter, there'll be like here's the key things, here's the exam prep, here's out of all of this paragraph, which is trying to explain it to you, these are the bits you need to know. And that's what those bullet points are giving you. These are the key bits. That. But you can't just give that on its own. You got to have that. And I think having that, the text, the big bit is what you're doing in the lesson. Yeah, so that's the explanation. But if you have the bullet points and you have Susie Nyman,
that's a summary. Yeah, well, either of us really. Yeah, because we've both been around the block and been teaching for years. With those books, is it inaccessible? And if they are inaccessible and in an education environment, if you have a visual impairment, learning disability or physical disability, and the individual meets the criteria, it's worth downloading the book in an alternative format from RNIB Bookshare. So get that school to make sure you've got an RNIB Bookshare account and you can download that book in a Word file, as a PDF, or as a DAISY book or an audio book, an ebook, and it might be more accessible for that student. Once you've got that book, I always start the topic with the terminology. And I'm quite fascinated by scientific terminology because at university, when I was doing my PhD, one side of the flat was a Greek girl and the other side was an Italian girl. And they used to tell me the roots of the words. And it was really fascinating, like stoma means mouth. Students need to be able to decode that information and understand that scientific terminology in order to remember those key words in science or key words in geography, key words in history, place names and things like that, so that they can remember it. And those science words can be split up into prefix, root and suffix. And you might have, for example, words that you're using all the time, like chlorophyll. Chloro means green. Photo means light. You might have hypo means below. Hyper means above. So you bring those into conversation and link it to something they know. They might have someone in the family with diabetes, so they might have gone hypoglycemic, so then they can remember that. They might have been in a river and got really cold and they've got hypothermia. They might have been on the beach somewhere in Dubai and got hyperthermia because they've got too hot. So linking it to something they know already really helps. So those words are divided into prefix, root and suffix. So prefix is things like hypo, hypoglycemic, hyper, hypoglycemia, poly meaning many, exo meaning exoskeleton, the skeleton on the outside that you get in crabs. Okay. Then the root, chloro, as I said before, means green. A bio means biology. Photo meaning light from photosynthesis. And phobic, you might have a phobia about something. Phobia of insects, phobia of spiders, or a phobia of water, hydrophobic. Phile, something that someone likes, hydrophilic. Or you might have something like itis, means inflammation of, such as bronchitis. And it's knowing those origins of words like etymology helps to identify those roots. And if you think about therm, you've got thermometer, exothermic, endothermic, thermal, geothermal, thermal. thermoregulation, and thermistor. So they're all from that Greek word therm, meaning temperature. So if we're going to use that standardized approach and teach those words, speak and use those words out loud. So I'll stand up and I'll say erythrocyte, and I'll conduct the class and get all the class to say the word erythrocyte. I might write it on the board. Erythro means rose-coloured, cyte means cell. They're speaking it out loud, writing it on their mini whiteboards. They love that. Breaking down those words, for example, esophagus for esophagus, and repeating it many, many times. Tell them the root and give an example in a sentence and revisit that terminology. We might play the weakest link or bingo.
Nice. But it's if you just read words and you don't have that background information of the morphology, where that word came from, all that lot, you probably can pick it up as wrong. But if you have that background information, if you're tackling a new word and it's got psi, something to do with the brain, probably. Psychiatry, so you literally go, okay, so that's a psi, okay, and you're linking those words, and you're going to get a meaning because you have those bits, and you can sit there. So endothermic reaction. So hang on, that's an outside heat. So you're literally building it up, and it helps you understand. But to get that knowledge, you've got to start with hearing those words. So when you hear that and you're seeing it, it's making that connection with what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing.
And I have found with dyslexic students that they can't sometimes say those words. And so therefore you need to get them to say them over and over again. Give them ways to remember the spelling. And I had that recently with a student in the summer. She was saying the word wrong. It was the word glycogen. And so we broke it down into gly. And I said, what does that sound like? And she said, glide. So we drew a picture of someone gliding. I said, co means with. So we drew a picture of two people holding hands. And I said, what does gen sound like? And she said, genetic. So we drew a DNA. And then she could say the word glycogen because she kept saying glycogen.
I would have said glycogen. Without knowing what the word means,
yeah,
I would have seen it's a C, I'm guessing. But in my head, I would have gone for glycerin type sound.
Really?
But as a scientist, you've probably gone, my God, man, that's not even linked. That's completely different spelling and blah, blah, blah. But it's without having that knowledge, I would have thought glycogen.
It's interesting, isn't it?
But now you said gly, co, because there's a meaning behind it. You then understand it.
And I got it from her. What do you see it as? And she said, gliding. And when I told her the co meant with, she went, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
She then got it, and we drew it in different colours, put images underneath, dual coding, and then she got it, and then she could remember it and not forget it.
But it's understanding where those words split. You need some knowledge so that actually the co is there because it's linking these two things together. It's like, so there's certain words that, yes, it could be glyso or glyco. The meaning of the words tells you which one it probably is. Always makes me think of the episode in Friends where they asked Ross for as part of his interview for the job to spell a dinosaur. And he starts spelling it. So wrong, there's a silent, he's like, how would I have known that? And then he asked someone else, and well, if it's like this, then it's that scientific knowledge of that area would tell you how to spell it. So, they're not going to have that because they're here to learn. So it's giving them those skills.
It is. And I think becoming familiar with the words and getting the knowledge, the understanding, and the confidence to use those words, I've created this blood information sheet whereby I've got the different words on the page, and I can get the students to look at that sheet and then laminate it, maybe do some words and some images, and then on the back we can play the weakest link, which they love playing. I was working with a boy up at the oratory, and we were talking about the periodic table on the first row. Okay. The first period in the periodic table. And I mentioned beryllium, and he said to me, I don't know what you're talking about, miss. And I said, beryllium. And so what I did was I got Post-it notes and I color coded beryllium, and then he could see it. Sodium. And I broke it down so that he could actually see what the word was, because he couldn't see it. He couldn't hear what I was saying. But once I wrote it down and broke it down into different colors, he could then understand how that word was broken down and then remember it. And so I made special colored tiles, and I used to get them out and I used to put these words on the special colored tiles because I used to do pottery. And the boys found them really useful. But you could get laminated cards, all different colors, and then get the students to write on them. Once we know how that word looks and sounds, we can then clap the key words. Esophagus or beryllium. And so they're clapping that and they're remembering it a lot easier. I said to you, they love playing the weakest link. But they turn the board over. And I play that game because it tells me, number one, who knows the answer. It's very quick if they don't.
Yeah.
Number two, who can spell. And if they can't spell, they get it wrong. And then I say, well, it's not an exam. Just look left and get your friend to help you to learn how to spell that, or I'll show them how to spell that. And so Ofsted came in and they were playing the weakest link, and bingo, the dyslexic girl got the wrong spelling. And she was on a mission that morning to check out literacy. And they given me the tap in the morning. The assistant principal had come in and said, they're looking for literacy this morning, Susie. I said, okay. And it was that girl, the dyslexic girl, couldn't spell esophagus. And I went round and I said, Mary Elizabeth, whatever her name was, it's esophagus. There's the Ofsted inspector writing it down. She's checking the literacy. She's checking the spelling. So that was really good. And she liked that. The Ofsted inspector liked the use of the weakest link to check their understanding.
I like the weakest link because you're not picking on one child. Everyone's going to turn the answer. Some will get it right. Some will get it wrong. It's really good at not isolating and not sharing it with others because the boards are pointing at you. I like the weakest link game.
Well, when I went to a school once and I had some ADHD boys in the audience, they couldn't keep still. So I got out with my bananagrams. Here's a few. I've just been crunching them there. And you can use those to test for spelling, which is quite useful. And if you're looking at those keywords and hooks, try mnemonics. Mr. Grens, Mrs. Nergs. You might do a story about something. Quite often I do a story for firing up neurons as a trip to Chessington. We might do a song. There's a circulatory song, a digestive system song. And that song gets them to visualise and practice saying those key words. They might do a mind map. And that mind map, I love doing mind maps. I put the tables into what I call conference formation, put all the tables together, massive banqueting roll I got from Costco, and we do giant mind maps. And we put all the keywords on there, you get the artist to do the pictures. And all those people that are a bit fed up or fiddling around, they do me a nice cartoon as well. Those revision cards are really interesting because last year I was working with some students on the neurons. Didn't understand any of it. I've got some that I've made out of material. And what I do is I shake them. Okay? And I get them to shake the different parts. And as they shake them, they'll hold the cell body and they'll shake that. They'll shake the axon. They like that. And they said, but we still need to have a way to remember it. So they drew the axon on a revision card and they color-coded the different parts. The axon had to be grey. But what was really interesting was that these two students saw it as grey. The cell body had to be green, for example. So they then drew the neuron on the front and in a certain colour, and everything to do with, for example, the axon was written in grey. And by the end of the lesson, they knew it all. It was absolutely fascinating to see it work. So what we did was, in order to get the information that they needed to learn, we got the book, CGP book, we downloaded it from R&IB Bookshare and copied and pasted that little section about neurons onto Microsoft Word or Google Docs. And then they pointed at the whiteboard and said, I see that as red. And we colour coded all this information in all different colours. And then they got it and they remembered it. So I think colour has a big impact on them.
I think, yeah, there is certain things like we talked about previously about arteries and veins is their colours. So when you're dinking parts, you go, right, what's a blue bit, what's a red bit? And I think, yeah, certain things, if you start colour coding things, so everything to do with this, we're going to do green, everything to do with this, we're going to do blue. And you're going through that paragraph and colour coding it, it really helps you see, just by colouring in those words, which bits are linked to which. And then you're going to help build that picture in your head of how it's all interconnected.
Yeah, it really helped them. Sometimes I show videos and I've spoken to the students about how something works and fits together. They see the video, and we said earlier that actually sometimes it's easier to understand it from a video than a book.
Yes.
So sometimes dyslexic students prefer to watch a video than read the book. And I've got my bananagrams, which are here. And so you can do those keywords and check the spellings. You ask students to make effective notes. When I went to school, you just got the book and wrote it out.
Write this paragraph in your own words, children.
So summarising those keywords, making effective notes. Don't just copy everything out. Make sure you identify the key or trigger words and list these on a revision card using different colours. And you might have the main points, you might have a subheading with bullet points, but always use words and pictures. But when you're creating those revision cards, your question and answer cards, you're taking control of your own learning. So you're then going to decide which question to ask and what the correct answer is going to be. You might put past questions on the back. Put past questions on the front and answers on the back, and you can revise alone. Revise with your friends, and then you might remember it better.
And I think this is one of the areas you need to explicitly teach at the beginning. Shows them different ways of making notes. Show them different ways of being able to retrieve this information later. That's the thing. A note is about retrieving. It's not about just writing things down because you're told to. It's about giving you that key information you need for later. And for different children, it will work differently. One of my children do flashcards. The other one cannot stand flashcards.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
But if they both work and it's what works. So you can't just say everyone do flashcards, because one of my daughters is like, this is the best thing ever. I love doing flashcards. The other one just says, this is a complete waste of my time. So she's got to do something which works for her. But that is something that she won't know what works for her until she's seen various options, then gone, that's the one. So that's why I was saying about this explicitly teaching at the very beginning is how do you make effective notes? Because if you can make effective notes from the beginning, then they're going to retrieve much more of that information later on.
Yeah, and I think, what I've been doing recently is with those revision cards, I've got 3 or 4 students to work together and create those revision cards on Google Slides. And of course, you can then print them out, 2 slides to a page, and they become revision cards. I say to them, use words and pictures that mean something to you. Only one fact on the card. Simplify the information. Vocalize what's on the card. Speak what you can see on the card. Make sure that makes sense. Use both sides of the card. And as you just said, flashcards don't work for everyone. Always use coloured pens, images. I've been using Google Slides. And here in front of me, you can't see it there, Dale, but I've got a revision slide here that my students have made, and they're doing something on the cardiovascular system. They've used red because they're talking about red blood cells. They've put small skinny, I think.
Small, skinny and flexible. I have it on my screen as well.
Small, thin and flexible. And they've used different fonts. So they've used a really narrow font for the skinny or thin, flexible, sort of more flowing fonts. No nucleus makes them room for hemoglobin, and then they put hemoglobin in capital letters, and they've put a big red blood cell on the front. Biconcave disc, and then when they've put large surface area, they've made the word large really large, which just they're taking responsibility for their own learning. Carries oxygen, they put oxygen in blue and carbon dioxide in black. But the best thing I like about this is that it says they're made in the bone marrow, and they've got a picture of a bone.
Which then says made in bone marrow across it, and you've got the red blood cell. But I like is a like a little truck picture.
Yeah.
In the window of the truck, it says red blood cell, and then on the back it's got oxygen and CO2.
Yeah, so it's transporting it. I think this is amazing.
And it's a PowerPoint slide or a Google slide, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a piece of paper. We always think of flashcards as you go down to Ryman's or wherever and buy that box of cards, and that's your flashcards, and you have to write them out. This, to me, is so much more accessible.
Yeah, and students nowadays are always stroking their phones, aren't they?
Yes.
You know, they've got the phone on them 24/7. If they want to revise, they don't need to go and find their revision cards. It's there immediately. We do models. Here's my Play-Doh. Take a sniff of that.
Oh, that's a nice smelly one.
It's Centos and it's strawberry.
Yes. I was expecting my childhood to come back and smell Play-Doh as that Play-Doh as it used to, but actually I now have strawberry scented fingers.
Yes. So we would use that for the oxygenated side of the heart. Check this one out.
Now, is blue going to be blueberry? Or is blue going to be raspberry because they grew up with Panda Pops?
It's supposed to be blueberry.
Blueberry.
There we go. And when they crack it open, you've got that sense, that touch, those fine motor skills, but you've also got the smell.
Yes.
And they really like that. They like playing with the Play-Doh. So you can make those models for the heart, or it could be for geography and you're making some sort of landfall. Yeah, an oxbow lake, it could be a spit or something like that. And so you could use different types of Play-Doh and make those models. I've been getting those balloons out a lot recently, Dale. Here's one I prepared earlier.
Previously, on a previous podcast, Susie made an entire digestive system out of balloons. How many balloons are we going for today? Just the one?
I'm just going to go for the one. And if you're talking about blood flow in the heart, what you can do is you can draw and divide that heart up. Hang on. I'll just draw on there. Okay. Can I just borrow that pen?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm just going to draw on there, and that heart divides in two with the septum, and then again for the atria at the top and the ventricles at the bottom. And when we're talking about the blood flow, it goes into the atria, you go to the tricuspid valve, into the ventricles, and you can squeeze that balloon. And they can squeeze their balloons and show you how that blood flows in the heart. So there we go. There's one balloon for you.
Balloon's gone.
You could use them.
This is where Susie says, I need that now.
Yes.
And I'm that child who's just knocked it away.
Yeah. So you could use them for shapes of molecules, also in chemistry, or you could make models of anything out of balloons if you're good at balloon modelling. We've spoken before about mind mapping. Do giant mind maps. Use words and pictures that you're doing two sides of the brain. And you can use quizzes. You can make the quizzes. You can use Google Forms, or you can use Kahoot or quizzes or something like that. The students seem to like revising using those sort of methods nowadays. And obviously they can stroke their phone, get into quizzes and do their own ones.
With that mind mapping, so we're used to doing, you mentioned about having that big piece of paper, and we're used to doing that. You can do it on computers, but there's mind mapping software, but also what you can do, which is really quite cool, is you can say to a piece of software, create me a mind map on blood cells, and it'll create it and do it as a thing, but you can then add to it and remove. So if you're doing that, it's going, I don't need that stuff. You can add your own. And it's great because it dynamically updates it as you add more information. It redoes it. What I was finding with my map, I'm always worried about if I start here and go off on that side's going to be much more heavy than that side, which doesn't look right to me. Whereas on the computer, it kind of balances it all out and sorts it all out, which is really nice.
So one of the Holy Trinity pieces of software that you get when you get access arrangements and you get disabled student allowance is MindView. Okay, and MindView is a mind mapping software by Matchware. And the beauty of that is, yes, you can mind map everything, but not only mind map, you can put in video links and past paper links and everything else on there. So this mind map becomes a massive resource of information. And I was helping my nephew last year with A-Level biology, and we went through this MindView program, and I went and showed him how you could have the keywords, color code it, words and pictures. Here's a past exam question. Here's a video that links it. And he really, really liked that. But not only that, you could take the mind map, press a button, and convert it into a PowerPoint.
Nice.
Or you could convert it into an essay plan for an essay, which is quite incredible. What you were talking about is artificial intelligence, and there's a company called AYOA. I don't know how you say it, but I saw them at the Education Festival at Wellington College in the summer, and that's the program. Their program is where you can talk to the computer and say, mind map me, I don't know, information from the First World War or something like that. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so it will create this amazing mind map. And then, yes, you can modify it if you want.
That's the thing, you've got to make sure it's at the right level and the right way you're looking at the world. It's things like that. So that's the thing is having an AI one is great, and it will do a load of the work and it will populate all the stuff you need, but there'll probably be a load of other stuff you're not needing right now. And you can get rid of that down to what you want. But what I often find is might have children going, I don't know how to start a mind map. If you give them a mind map and going, I don't need any of that, this is the bit I need, you're now halfway there. And they'll add those other bits and take it on further.
Yeah, and it's practicing that technique of making mind maps that's really useful for them.
And I love quizzes. Kahoot is great. Kahoot, anything like that, because it is making it more fun. It's also, people put their own names in, as long as they're sensible and clean, that's good. But what I like about that is you could be sitting there and you're putting your answers in and no one knows which one's you.
If you don't put your name in there.
So, yeah. If I put in Jedi Master or a Cat Father, which is on my T-shirt, anything I want, then I know who I am. Unless there's only 3 of you, in which case you can probably work it out. But if there's a large group, you don't know. And if you're in 15th place, no one knows. If you're in first place, you want to let everyone know. But if you're not, I quite like that way of seeing where I am, how I'm against everyone. It's a nice way without really pointing fingers or having hands up or seeing who doesn't not know the answer.
It can get quite competitive and they get quite excited about it, the students in class. But what I find fascinating is that you can play Kahoot all over the world. So my son was in Hong Kong singing, and the teacher at the same time was running an RE lesson and started a Kahoot in England. And the boys in Hong Kong jumped on board at the same time on their phones. And some of them got higher marks than the people who were actually in class. They joined in the other side of the world. I thought it was incredible.
It's great. If you haven't ever played Kahoot, go to YouTube, watch a video. How do you play Kahoot? It is so cool. And my daughter has made us Kahoot quizzes at home. Over lockdown, we would have Kahoot quizzes. And me and my wife and my daughter would compete. It got competitive.
Oh,
but it's just fun.
Good. Yeah. Give it a go. By doing all these different techniques in lots and lots of different ways, you're then revising that information. It's helping your retrieval practice, and therefore you can beat Ebbinghauser's forgetting curve. So normally, immediately after pupils have learnt something, they can remember quite a lot, a great deal, but rapidly that memory fades. But if you deliberately recall that information in lots of different ways, then you're going to actually be able to remember more information and recall it for your exams, which is great. So my next bit, Dale, is all about exam technique. And as you know from my grade riser, I see passing exams as a crock and bush because you need so many skills to pass exams. And at the top, we've got the command verb, marks, points, marks, minutes, the levels of response, how that question needs to be answered, pros and cons, point, example, explanation, relate, opinions of others and or theory. How are you going to remember it? It's paper chains. Oh my goodness, Dale. I can't believe this. I visited a school near Dartford and the teacher said, they can't link all these different bits and pieces together, all these different systems. I said, well, link it with paper chains. I said, it really helps. A year later, I visit the school. There are paper chains going up the pole all the way to the ceiling, across the ceiling and down the other side. The teacher said, they really got it. Those paper chains really, really helped. You can also use number pegs, Cornell notes, lolly sticks, post-it notes. You might brainstorm. Brainstorm's just throwing all ideas on the paper, and then you can mind map it. Storytelling, telling stories, plan, song, video, model, mnemonic. You might use dominoes. You might do a mind map, revision card, or a story. But then knowing that paper, what's going to be in that paper? Short answer questions, fill in the gap, multiple choice, tick in the box, diagrams, comprehension, or longer response questions. But you might be looking at maths as well, decoding that maths and how people find that, it's easier to do your maths when it's like adding up, taking away, dividing, multiplying. It's when it's that written question that people find really difficult. And I think that comes back to you and your daughter who can't make the movie in her head about what they're asking in the question. And that's why it's really hard.
If you pull out the sum from that, she'll look at that and go, without even blinking, she'll just tell you the answers. She can do the maths so quickly in her head, but she reads the written question and she sometimes just doesn't see what the question is asking. And generally, when I see a written question, it helps me to really turn it into a practical thing. Yeah. So so if you're doing this, she'll tell me the answer. I'm like, that's what it's asking. She's like, oh, I see it now. And so turning it into more than just reading it is turning it into a practical in your head. I found makes that easier. But decoding those maths questions, a lot of children do find hard.
I remember working with a boy on maths and it was probability and it was to do with cards, and actually drew all the cards out so you could work out what the probability was of finding a heart, or the probability of finding a spade or a queen or something like that. And it wasn't until I drew all those cards out that you could actually understand it.
Yeah.
You need the visual. And once you've decoded that information, it's really good to practice those exam questions. With this standardized approach, we actually told the students that there are ranges of different question types that are going to be on their paper. So they're looking at identify, name and list, or state, and that's going to be worth 1 mark. It could be you're ticking the correct statement. The true and false they find really hard, and I don't know why that is. They might have short answer questions, multiple choice, open response, and longer extended response questions. And it's those questions that we've really gone into detail and said, okay, 6 marks, might be 3 points explained. Is it a 1 or is it a 2-part question? Is it the cause and the effect? Is it evaluate, which is pros and cons? We have a range of different types of questions. It's generally the longer response questions that they find difficult. So levels of response is normally a longer extended response. The command verbs they find hard is analyze and evaluate. So you need to teach them what analyze means. What does evaluate mean? Evaluate, it's the pros and cons. Explain, give the how and the why, put the word because in. What does discuss mean? Compare. So you might be comparing two things. They need more detailed answers. We've been structuring those answers, saying, okay, it's an evaluate. We need two pros and we need two cons. So use that appropriate terminology, make sure you've got enough points, break down that question, make sure you're covering all the information that is required in that question.
I think that those different command verbs, analyse, explain, evaluate, discuss, and compare. And that's the thing, all these exams are very systematic.
They are.
They are very standardized. It's all about conforming to what those expectations are, because it's much easier to mark everyone answers the same way. So rather than actually, in reality, again, focusing on topics is making sure they are really, really clear. You should play weakest link on those command verbs of what it is they're expecting and making sure what is it you're supposed to do.
Yes.
Because if they're getting that bit wrong, it doesn't matter what their knowledge is, they're going to be losing marks. And those bits are across everything. So it's important that is like your bread and butter. You should have that. All the subject knowledge gets put on top of that. But if you don't have that at the beginning, you're going to be just dropping marks so easily.
Yeah. So last year, this standardised approach, we finished early. We finished teaching at Christmas. And then the first week back, we did all the short answer questions. So we laminated all the diagrams and we had them as A3 questions. And they used ball pens for the week. And they did every single system until they knew it. And it's this automaticity that Abigail Hawkins talks about. Get those answers automatic so that you then have got more time to concentrate on those longer response questions. If they know what that command verb is, yes, they've got more chance of getting all those lovely marks. There are a couple of, easy things to remember. If a question asks for ways, you give at least 2 because it's the plural rule. If it says reasons or aspects or methods, you give at least 2. Yeah. So it's just it's teaching that. Once we've done that, short answer questions after Christmas, the second week, we gave them more exam questions. I gave out papers and I went round and I worked in 3s and 3s or 4s. And I said, right, let's talk through the paper. You read the question. What's the command verb? What are they asking? Is it a 1-part or a 2-part question? They'll tell me. Where's the mark scheme? How many points do we need? Is it a cause and an effect? Have you got 2 causes? Have you got 2 effects? Okay. Have you given reasons for that? And you'll move up from level 1, which is basic, just a bullet point. Sound, normally giving reasons. And then sometimes you get level 2 sound because you haven't actually put down 4 answers. You've only put 2. And then level 3, in depth. It could be your answer with examples and reasons, your opinions of others, and or theory. Check back with the question. Make sure you've written the right response. Make sure if it's asking for the digestive system, you're not writing about the circulatory system. Answer the question. Don't just write everything you know down on a topic because you're not going to get any marks for it. So what was really fascinating with my students is a couple of years ago, they had a question on the cirrhosis of the liver and also about digestive system and the esophagus. They couldn't read the word cirrhosis and they couldn't read the words esophagus. Just leave that question. So they failed. Failed those questions. Might end up with an R. If you had a scanning pen, you could have read that with your scanning pen. Yes. You could use an exam reader scanning pen and that would have helped. Also, you could use, if you had the access arrangements, text out, read and write. And that reads it to you. And also you can voice type your answers, which really helps not having to have a scribe and a reader. Because when you go into the world of work, who's going to stand over your shoulder and read and write everything for you? If you have that technology that you're using as your normal way of working, you're more likely to be able to access the information and move on, move forward. When you go to university, be able to keep up with everything.
Definitely. And I think there is a bit, I think, still a stigma about not writing. And I think we've got to move past it. It's the information they're conveying is the important part. Not how they're doing it. It's the fact they're able to understand the question and they're able to provide the information that question is asking. Whether they're doing it through the written and spending lots of time writing it all out, or if they're doing it verbally. Now, some might say if you're doing it verbally, you probably don't have to worry about the spelling. I've got no idea. But in reality, if you get what I mean, and I've put a little letter out of place because I'm not thinking about my spelling, does it really matter?
Some exams don't look at spelling, but I think in science ones you need to get it right. Depends if you're writing an essay or not. You might be able to get away with it. Quite often there's marks for spag, but not all exams have marks for spag. I thought I might just briefly speak about that paper structure, because if you know about that paper structure, you know there's going to be 5 questions, you know there's going to be short answers, fill in the gap, tick in the box, longer response questions. You're going to open that paper and you're not going to be worried about it. It's just going to be similar to what you've seen before. But if you're going in there and you've got access arrangements and you're going to be given extra time, know how to use it. And students are going to be given extra time because they need to reread the text, they need longer to formulate their ideas, they might have processing problems, need longer to write answers, or English is simply their second language. And what we did with this standardised approach was we tried to get the students to plan their exam time, calculate the total number of minutes for the whole exam, note the start and finish time, how many questions need to be answered, how many minutes, practice answering the questions in that allocated time for longer answers, work out the number of minutes for the question, when it should begin and when it should finish.
There's one thing I know for my daughter's doing GCSEs and exam, there was one person who didn't realise there was extra pages at the back. They thought they'd finished. They didn't actually look. So it is worth at the beginning really turning every page so you know without fat doubt how many questions, what that last question is. And I know quite a few children, my daughter said that she literally lots of people were still writing at the end. And I know from my experience, sometimes people get too carried away with one question.
Yeah.
They're not looking at the mark scheme. They're putting all that information there. They're kind of writing everything they know type approach. And it's actually going, no, this is understand what they're asking for and how much time to spend on each question is really important, that you pace yourself correctly through the exam. Because if you're struggling on some questions, which shouldn't take too long, but actually for you, there's an easier question much later on.
Yeah.
And especially if it's got an exam where it's spaced, you got spaces. For me, I do multi-choice exams from Microsoft. And they say if you don't know a question, you can mark it and come back to it, which is really good because kind of as I'm doing the other things, my part of my head's still thinking about it. And what happens is I get to another bit, and as I'm starting writing, I'm going, I know the answer to that one now. Rather than sitting all that time wasting it, it's like when you play those games on the radio and you go, pass, and we'll come back to the answers you passed on. It's that sort of approach. You pass, you come back to it. And that way you're not wasting time. That's my personal experience. But that depends if you have the structured paper where you can come back, not you have to have the right amount of space, which was my maths. You had to space it all out correctly yourself.
I think that's true. And I think choosing that question, look through the paper, as you said, read all the possibilities, choose the subject you've studied in class, the thing you're really familiar with, then choose that question where you're really confident you can give a good answer. Think about the command verbs, scope, how you're going to answer that question, and limitations of each question. It reminds me of when I used to go for piano lessons, and there was one bar in that piece of music that you kept getting wrong. So the piano teacher would make me play that bar 10 times over. And then he would make me play the rest of the piece. And then 10 minutes later, we will come back to that bar And as you said, your brain is working it out while you're doing something else.
It's
amazing.
Your subconscious brain is just churning through, and it's literally like you have a librarian who is just working through your library, looking for that thing. While you're working, there's a little librarian going through, going, "Oh, come on, we know this. It's in there somewhere," and it's looking for that key, that hook, and suddenly you get it, and it's there. It's
Bingo.
Amazing.
You can answer that question. So read that question thoroughly, question the question. What's the command verb? What's the scope? What are the limitations? And then planning that written answer, maybe brainstorm the key things, the key words you're going to put in there, mind map that plan. Because if you're given access arrangements, you've got extra time, you've got a little bit more time to plan your answers. You might do a storyboard plan with a descriptive or narrative answers. You might like to draw some cartoons, a bit like we said earlier about Rossi Stone using cartoons to help him remember the information in his exams. You might want to get your page and you're doing an argumentative or discursive answer and you're going to divide it into 2 so you've got enough answers. It could be 10 marks, you need 5 points. Yeah. Okay. And flow diagrams for writing experiments or sequences and events, but proofreading. And I don't think we talk enough about this really. Check for capital letters. I think names have now got a disease and they don't have capital letters anymore. So many students don't put capital letters on their names.
I think it's a texting thing.
Maybe it is, yeah. Check for punctuation, look for spelling errors, check the things you know and what your weaknesses are. Work backwards through the essay just to check everything. Check your conclusion actually answers the question and amend it if necessary.
And with that, it's reading the question again. So you've written your answer, read the answer, read the question, then you'll go, yep, my answer has answered that question. That's something that I've previously gone, yeah, I've written a lovely block of text. I've now realised it doesn't actually answer the question because I can focus on the completely wrong part. Yeah,
and it's a bit like doing your maths when you can add it up and then you can take it away and see if you've got the right answer. So be prepared for that exam. Set a good selection of pens. Have you got your pens with you? Get your see-through bag. Have pencils, rubbers, rulers, equipment, highlighters. Bring them to every exam. I remember when I first started at Farnborough, a boy came up to biology and said, "Oh, Susie, can I borrow your calculator?" Because it was a paper that required calculations. You could use a calculator, you didn't have one. So make sure you've got the correct equipment in there. So I know these students get into a lot of stress and panic, don't they?
I would say exam prep on the day starts the night before. Yeah, I personally would say it's better to go to bed early and maybe watch some TV than to revise till 2:00 in the morning. You want your brain relaxed and ready for the exam. You want to make sure that you're not rushing. You've got time. You've had your breakfast, the same breakfast you always have. So it gives you confidence and you know what you're going to have. You've got your water bottle. You want to make arriving at that exam as most boring and unstressful as possible. You don't want it to be eventful. You want it to be nothing so that you can be ready for that exam.
When we were doing our exams at university, I used to go out for a walk with my friend in Newcastle. We used to go into the town mall and walk up the little hillocks, I think they're up there, and get loads of fresh air and then go to bed. And every night at 10:00, we used to sit in the living room and do what I would call now laughing therapy. We used to just tell jokes and laugh and laugh and laugh, get really relaxed. And one of our friends used to make scones and they used to appear out the oven about 9:30. And then we used to sit there, have these scones, laugh and go to bed and be relaxed, ready for the exam the next day.
It's really important. And for those who think you've got to cram, it's like you don't. You push one thing in, you focus on that, the other bits go. You kind of want everything to be relaxed and ready to go, not one thing at the front of your mind that you go, oh, I forgot about this or anything. I remember my A-levels, I'd be there with my headphones on listening to music. And there were all these people around me with their textbooks open or reading their notes, and they go, right, time to come in. And they're still trying to read and get that last little bit of token information into their head. And I'm just listening to my music going, oh, time to stop listening to my music and just go and relax. And you just see these people really worried. And I think at that point, it's a negative thing you're doing. You're pushing other things out of your head. It's pushing it into,
But start now.
Yes.
Start a term, start revising now, start making your revision cards, go back to them, beat the forgetting curve, and just control that stress before you write everything down. Close your eyes and visualize that answer. What do I think ought to be in there? Between questions, do a few exercises such as arching your back, deep breathing. Think about being calm. Eventually, those ideas will return. But as we said before, look at that paper and answer the questions that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
At the start. And enjoy. Exams aren't hard work. They can be stressful, but they can be rewarding. You can do your best. You can have extra time to think, read and plan, check those answers and change or amend them, and don't waste it. I remember I actually did 20 series of chemistry questions when I sat my A-level chemistry, and I went in and I looked at the question and I knew the answer before I even took the calculator out because I'd done so many past questions. So my advice is do as many as you can because it's really good.
My favourite bit when we talk about this sort of stuff is fail to prepare, prepare to fail.
You said that before.
It is just, and that's the whole thing with all of this process you're talking about. It is all in the preparation. It's that work you do or should be doing for the last 2 years as your GCSEs or your A-levels or whatever you're doing. It's that 2-year course. The preparation starts at the beginning and you do that all the way through, which means as you get towards the end, you're much more prepared. Whereas what some people think is you coast, cram.
Yeah, it's not good to cram.
It's not going to be in. You'll read it, you'll go through it all, and that forgetting curve will come in and it'll disappear off. It needs to be embedded over those 2 years. And if you're doing that over those 2-year period, you're going to enjoy the exam.
You are, and moving from your short to long-term memory.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
You're going to know that I actually have a chance to show off what I know rather than cramming and just being really worried of what's going to be in there. It's a really difference. I would say those who don't, I'm not saying exams are my favorite thing ever. Just to be clear, I'm not saying they are literally the best thing ever. I still get nervous going to exams, but I'm nervous about what it means. And I sit down, I see the first questions are going, oh, got this, and I'm off. But if you don't have that, if you've been worrying about it, it's almost like if you're pulling something, if you're picking up something, if your hand's shaking or you're really worried, it's going to be harder to pick it up. If you can just calmly reach down and pluck it out, that is what being calm is about. It's being able to reach down, pluck that information out and put it on the piece of paper. And if you're not calm, that's going to be hard.
Calm and confident about what you're going to write, what the questions are going to be about. And in here, I've put a few questions you might have. Fill in the gaps, tick in the box, fill in the box, and you're given a list of words and they're going to put them in the box with an example of a function maybe on the left, and you've got to put a component on the right. You might have fill in the gaps, and you can try putting those answers in the gaps and practicing them. But not only that, create your own fill in the gaps. And then here we've got to describe a sequence of events that takes place in the heart during the cardiac cycle. We've got really difficult concepts to understand there. So when I taught this, I actually taught it with a balloon and I got them to talk about what was going on. They found it really hard, but after demonstrating it, they could then use the words and they could understand it. So look at that mark scheme. And I said to them, okay, this is normally going to be a 5 or 6 mark. Remember 2 answers and then work out the third. Okay. So work out 2 answers, diastole, atria, contract. Okay, so you've got diastole, atria, contract, and then if they're contracting, what's relaxing? The ventricles. So remember 2 and work out the third or fourth. 2 key ones that you can remember. A relatable way to remember that information. And then just get it lodged in your head to be able to recall it later. I've spoken to you before about my exam task board and breaking everything down into what is the question, what's the task, what type of question is there, the examiner's 5 ideas, minutes, marks, points, possible answers, pros and cons, levels of response, what I do and don't understand, and how you're going to answer that question. You're looking at decoding that, making sure you know the correct terminology. We've said many times, know those command verbs, know what different types of questions are going to come in. Short answers, longer response questions, multiple choice, fill in the gap, stick in the box, diagram and comprehension. And those longer response questions, this is where we had the standardized approach. Is it description? Is it an analysis? Am I analysing the correct information? How many points do they want? What are the points they're asking for in the mark scheme? Which ones can I remember? Remember those, put those down in your answer. Evaluation, pros and cons, etc. You might have an essay. And these essays, we will get those maybe model answers or mark schemes. Create that essay plan. Is it the unique causes and effects, which means 2 causes, 2 effects. Okay, cause 1 is, and then write it out. Cause 2 is, write it out, effects, whatever. And so making sure that you've got that plan. Writing frames, it could be that you're writing an answer out and you can remember that. It could be sentence starters or something like that. But how to scaffold those answers? I've got this question I've got to answer. How would I do it? How would the teacher do it? How does Mary in the corner that's really clever do it? Yeah? Get Mary in the corner who's really clever to teach another student who really has difficulty. Peer mentoring, if you like. And model that answer. This is how you do it. This is how many answers. This is what analyze means. This is what evaluate means. And make sure you've got the pros and the cons, or you're making a qualitative judgment against some information you're writing about. When you're writing that essay, not only in class, but also exams, you could use voice typing. So in Microsoft Word, you would use Dictate. You might use voice typing in Google Docs, but you might be able to use Text Help Read and Write, and you can also use that in your exams.
Which makes it the most sense, because if you can use it in the exams, you want to know how you're going to work. You want to, if you're using Text Help Read and Write, you want to be really confident with that going into the exam, like it's just picking up a pencil to you. That's, you don't want to be going, oh, I've got to worry about this. No, that should be your bread and butter. It's like picking up a pencil to you, so you can go in and just use it like you've been using it all the time.
And it's your normal way of working. That those students are really familiar with the levels of response, level 1, 2, and 3, level 1 basic, 2 sound, 3 and in depth, what it means, and how to get all those lovely marks. They might know all that information, but to be able to keep practicing over and over again the answers to those questions, that they become automatic, and make sure that they can answer the paper in the exam timed conditions. And so planning that exam time, we've spoken about before, with extra time. What I really like is think like an examiner. Become an expert at decoding those exam questions. Show you know exactly what the examiner wants. And what we've been doing this last 2 weeks is writing your own similar exam questions, so that when they go in the paper, they're familiar with it. They can also create their own mark schemes. And the examiners don't have time. Be clear and precise with those answers. Dale, did you ever create a study group? Did you ever study with someone else, or was it just your own club?
I never studied.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay.
Partly, I didn't know how to,
That's interesting.
but I also, most time, I never needed to. So there's a whole thing. As I look at that, I'm going, I'd love to unpick why, but I didn't know how, so I just didn't. But then I started doing exams and realized I didn't need to. So I was very lucky, very fortunate that the way my head works, if I can contextualize it in my head, it's in and I can just recall it. Very lucky. So study groups, not my sort of thing.
It's interesting because, some of my students, by helping one another, they understand it better.
Yeah, no, sometimes, and that's the thing is I sometimes do courses with my colleague John, and we'll do something. I look at it, I contextualize it. I've got this, and he goes, "I don't get it," and I explain it to him, and that explanation, and then watching him understand it, has really affirmed that I've understood it, and that works with every person, and it's a really good way of to really know you've got it is to teach someone else.
What's very useful too is to use exam board source material. We've spoken about past papers, mark schemes, model answers. Examiners' reports are really useful. So they tell you what the students or candidates found difficult during that exam series and what they wrote up well and what they answered well. For OCR, you can use Exam Builder. So you can look up a topic and you can ask, can you list all the questions on cystic fibrosis, for example? And there are other programs you can use in other exam boards. AQA is Exam Pro. So teachers can get in there and create their own tests. In all of this, we're always trying to beat that forgetting curve, beat the forgetting curve and create your own revision planner. Now, I had a boy and his mother said, "Excuse me, Dr. Nyman, can you create a revision planner for my son?" I said, "Yeah, okay." So I found this nice planner sheet, filled it in, and she said to me, "Oh, I can't do any of that. We're going to Ireland for that week." So the revision planner has to come from the student and to fit around. I play rugby on a Saturday morning or I play cricket on a Wednesday. And I always go to work on a Tuesday evening at McDonald's or something. So to fit in the things that they always do and then fit their revision time around that.
And I think it's also, what is revision? Revision isn't learning it for the first time. Revision is kind of generally jogging your memory. Just make sure you've got those key bits clear in your head. For my daughter, it's interesting, is she doesn't get revision. And my wife had a conversation basically saying to her, "Okay, learn the bits you don't know." She went, "Oh, okay." And she'd get the book out and go, I know. Oh, I don't know that. I'll go do that. Learn the bits you don't know was just like, oh, that was like an eye opener for her. And yeah, if you're one of the people it locks in and it's in, then it is learning what you don't know. But for others, it's nudging. It's seeing, did you do it enough that it's still in that memory, or was it in that forgetting curve? Has that hit you and you've forgotten it? In which case, hopefully just going through it, nudging some of those things, try and go through it. It's, what does revision mean to you? And this, again, really means you must have good notes to go back to.
That's right. And you've broken it down to the key words and you've got something that you can just cascade from your brain that will then help you in the exam. Over my door in the classroom, it says, "If you believe, you can achieve." So you need to empower, motivate and inspire those students that they can reach their goals and move to the top of the mountain. So in summary, really, it's a massive load of information we've spoken about this afternoon, Dale. But I think the big thing is to look at those exam papers. Don't be scared about it. Start early with your revision. And if you can look at those longer response questions, understand the command verbs, how many marks, how many minutes, you're on to a winner. And that is how we got our students up with their grades last academic year. And we're going to follow that again this academic year to just keep moving ahead and making sure our students do well.
But it is when you realise all these exams these days are so systematic and there are so many rules which are very clearly defined from their point of view. But if actually that hasn't been passed on to the students, then you're really putting them at a disadvantage just going into the exam. So you need to make sure they understand. So when it says reasons and there's an S, that means two. Sure. If they say give you a reason, it's one. Understanding those things, really simple. Reading that question, reasons, analyze, blah, blah, blah. I know exactly what I've got to do. You know what to write. If you don't have that in there in the first place, so it's important to, the exam questions, really understand that what's asking, making really good way of making notes from the very beginning. I think in the dyslexic grade riser, you kind of talked about at the end of each topic, just kind of going through your notes, making sure that if you come back to them in a year's time, they're going to make sense to you.
Yeah.
Preparing your notes, maybe doing that. And hearing you saying that, I'm going, no, that's completely new to me, that idea. No idea. Perhaps if I made notes, that might have helped, but I didn't know what I was. So there's a whole load of things that I kind of didn't know what I was supposed to be doing, so I didn't do, which has then led me down the way I am. But making sure your children know what's their note making like. So maybe after the first topic, you literally look at everyone's notes and maybe model, actually, Mary in the corner, she's a lovely notes. Let's all look at this. And go through why she's done that. And actually, these are the good bits and things like that, and show actually this what really helps. But again, what works for Mary might not work for Dave. Dave might need something completely different. He just might want bullet points, or he might just go, watch this video, or go to each. What works for them. But as long as it works, when they come back, that's really important. But it is not, with all of this, it's not something you do a month before the exam.
It's from now.
It's from now. And that's the bit that was really interesting and really something that for my children, I don't think they were doing. And we've tried to make them be better and preparing. For my eldest, it's doing really, really well.
That's good.
The youngest, year 10, we're going to see how this year goes.
But also get the teachers to go to the exam board training. There's quite often online training about different topics and different subjects that's free. And they're going to have some face-to-face training soon, coming up soon, which is good news.
So, once again, thank you for coming on the show today. I love recording with you because I never know what to expect. And I must say, today's episode was quite boring. Not many props came out. She has a whole suitcase with her.
Yeah, I've got Play-Doh balloons, bananagrams, neurons. Yes. That wasn't too much for today, Dale.
Balloons. Yeah, we got some.
We had a lot earlier when I did my other podcast. Yeah.
So as always, I will be sharing some links from Susie along with her contact details so you can reach out to Susie. And you'll find the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast or on our website, www.thesendcast.com. As always, thank you for listening. We love doing this, don't we?
We do, Dale. You, me, and Percy Pig.
Percy Pig. Go and have a Percy. I'll keep
You've
talking.
Left some
you
in
have
the packet for
There's
me.
a few left. There's a few left. And please follow us on social media. On the artist formerly known as Twitter, we are at The Sendcast. On Facebook, The Sendcast. On Instagram, The Sendcast. And if you want to get in touch, let us know your thoughts, suggest topics, or anything else. Please send us a message on one of the social medias or send an email to hello@thesendcast.com. And if you've enjoyed the Sendcast, enjoyed this podcast, why not look into our Sendcast sessions? Our online CPD that you can purchase for your school. Each session is £10, but is yours forever, so you can build up a library of CPD around SEND that everyone in your school can access. We also run free Send briefings twice a year, designed to help everyone keep up to date with the changes going on in the world of SEND. And if you want to find out more, head over to the Sendcast website, where you can see a list of all the sessions. There's over 100 already. And as always, you'll find a link in the show notes, or just search Sendcast sessions and you'll find us. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Sendcast. It's goodbye from Percy. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. Thank you very much, Dale.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.